So I'm joined by Yella from Dusk Network. Good to see you again, man.
Hey Tom, always a pleasure. Glad to be back.
It's good to have you on again. So since we last spoke, there's been tons of developments going on with Dusk, and we're going to go into all of that during this interview. We're going to dive deep into the security token space and how you guys are trying to be an integral part of that sector. But first, let's kick it off with you just introducing yourself for the audience.
Right, so my name is Jelle Pol, one of the founders and currently leading the business side at Dusk Network. I have a background in business and IT, where I've worked for a few startups in the past, and then most notably for the large energy company Shell, where I was one of the founding members of the blockchain team there. Did some time in renewables and wind energy, and then later moved on to start my own business in blockchain, which led to what is now Dusk Network. Dusk is a privacy-oriented blockchain with smart contracting features. Our lead cryptographer, Dimitri, the guy that invented Equihash, he kind of describes it as a love child between Ethereum and Zcash, which I think is a nice ambition. I don't want to claim that we're already there, but it's conceptually the kind of potential that we're shooting for.
Okay, well, the first question really, you guys are building a blockchain specific for security tokens. And if you look at the data, the majority of security tokens currently are using Ethereum. So let's jump in with the immediate question. What's wrong with Ethereum and why create a blockchain specific for security tokens?
Right. So Ethereum is a general purpose smart contracting blockchain, right? It was always dubbed as the world computer, especially in the few early years. And it does a lot of things amazingly well. The issues that we see in the security token space is that there's quite a lot of niche requirements that even underlying infrastructure needs to have. So this is around certain privacy features to prevent market manipulation, or that allows for trade secrecy, to certain transparency requirements, but also practical things like settlement finality. Like Ethereum is obviously highly forkable. We've seen a lot of propositions do it. It can happen for various reasons, and it takes a while for a transaction to finalize. And when we're talking securities, these are tricky things. Also, there's still proof of work, which kind of typically doesn't sit very well with the regulators, because they see mining in general as a kind of bad thing, and even though they might not understand the full nuances there. They will at 11 in the morning, might be approving your security token prospectus, and at 2 in the afternoon there's a policy meeting on eco-friendliness and sustainability, and they switch hats relatively well, but not that well. So if you're going to be averse of their their general policies, it's going to hurt your approval and your compliance in the security space. So there's all kinds of things that might not be apparent at first that are already relevant at kind of the layer 0, the layer 1, that you can embed into your consensus mechanism even, that will kind of set you up for compliance down the road.
It's a very interesting proposition, really, because as you say, Ethereum is great for many things, but the security space is so different to what has come in crypto so far. You have to bed in so many more things into the protocol itself in order to make sure things are compliant. And as you say, you meet the standards which securities are already at. So finality times is a great example. And there's, I guess, several different approaches some people are taking. A lot of people are building on Ethereum and saying permissionless is fantastic. Some people think that we could just use blockchains in a permissioned mechanism, and they say we don't really need a permissionless blockchain. So it's interesting you guys have gone down the route of permissionless, similar to Ethereum. Permissionless meaning, for those who don't know, that anyone can become a miner and be part of the network. It's not just a limited group of people. So why did you guys pursue that instead of permissioned?
Yes, so the consensus is public, right? So people can protect. Well, there's a few things there. So the big thing with a permissionless and a public blockchain is the scalability that it comes with, right? And the fact that you're relying on your consensus or on your network for upkeep, stability, and robustness, and this layer 1, layer 0 adoption. And in our opinion, it's very, very tricky to go for large scale adoption if that sits in the hands of a few. Because this needs to be open source, and it needs to be run by a lot of people, and there might be all kinds of use cases for the protocol beyond security tokens that we haven't thought of yet, right? Or that we might not be focusing on, but others will. In that case, it makes a lot of sense to have a permissionless public blockchain. Where the permissioned elements come in, I think, are on the individual propositions. So if a company, for example, deploys a security token proposition on top of Dusk, right, they will have certain privileges within their own smart contract that stem from the fact that they are, legally accountable and responsible for the management of this asset. I think that's where it makes a lot of sense to grant a little bit more responsibility to these projects. However, it's not a good enough reason to centralize the underlying infrastructure because of that. So our entire consensus, the entire infrastructure, permissionless and public, and then for specific smart contracts, a issuer might have a few other steps available to them, a few other actions available to them, right? Because they own, manage, or own, they issue and manage the security. So that's where the added permissions and responsibilities come in.
I love it. I mean, for me at least, blockchain is just so irrelevant if it's permissioned. You lose so many advantages of blockchain. It's correlating a lot of people together that aren't necessarily linked, and the blockchain is what allows that. So without being permissioned, it's pointless.
People need to really make that distinction in their minds, right? Because if we're effectively, if you build an app store on Google Play, right, and then you allow someone builds an app and they can change, the title and the description or whatever of their own app, that's something vastly different than them being able to change the app store, right? Mm-hmm. That's kind of the level that we should view it on.
That's a good analogy. I like that one. You've used that one a few times before, I'm sure. Yeah. Well, I guess one of the interesting things that then kind of pops into mind is with securities, like traditional securities, you have a level of privacy. So for example, if I hold Google shares in my account, if you create a tokenized version and it's on an Ether address, I might hold in the future, say, tokenized Google shares, but I don't want someone to be able to click on my address and then know I also hold a certain amount of Netflix shares. It's not a great system. You need some sort of privacy inbuilt, and you guys are focused on that. So do you want to elaborate on how that exactly works?
Yeah, so what we do a few things there, and it's mainly in the realm of zero knowledge. So we've built a few novel libraries there. Basically, our application of zero knowledge and bulletproof really focuses around proving certain parameters without having to reveal the actual information, right? So this stems from enforcing certain trading restrictions that a company might have. For example, we cannot have any shareholders in the US, or we cannot have people owning more than 10%. We can enforce rules like this without having to reveal these participants' information to the whole outside world. But it also it's on the transaction layer. It's in the consensus. There's relevant steps where outsiders have no reason to see your investment strategy, right, or your personal holdings, or you name it. The beauty about zero knowledge is that we can prove a lot of these things in order to be compliant, but we don't have to reveal or even store the underlying information, meaning that we give people privacy. There's enough transparency for asset issuers, the regulators, to assure that everything is done by the book. And then we can also really start focusing on the fact that when used correctly, both privacy and transparency can be forces of good, right? And not necessarily that full transparency is always the best possible thing. I think both, when used in excess, are not necessarily good things. So we're really looking to strike that balance.
So as a concrete example, hypothetically, let's say I own tokenized shares in a company and I send them to you because they're both KYC'd, and that's absolutely fine according to the regulation. You wouldn't then be able to go on my address and see what else I hold?
No.
Okay, that's I mean, it seems so basic and it seems so important in a way for securities. So when you look at something like Ethereum and companies building on top of that, what do you guys think?
Well, I think it's a very natural response, to be honest. They were the only game in town for so long, and they're so well adopted and they're so well known. They're definitely the incumbent, and I think they will be for many, many use cases for years to come. We're definitely not shooting to oust Ethereum as a general purpose blockchain, right? But we do think there's a few areas that need a bit of special love with regards to usability and requirements that you cannot expect a general purpose chain to incorporate, because then they're veering off into one extremely specific direction, and that's not what they are, right? So they need to stay true to themselves, and that gives us possibilities to enter a niche and capture that very well. So I think it's very understandable that people have built on Ethereum so far. I think there weren't very many good other options there. We've seen a lot of platform players pop up, so they use Ethereum, but they are then forced to bolt on some kind of solution on top, right? Because all of these underlying requirements are missing. So they have these quirky workarounds, which leads to centralization and cost and kind of suboptimal solutions. So we're really hoping that guys like that will find it interesting to become relatively blockchain agnostic, right? And they can work on Ethereum for certain things and on Dusk for others, or become fully Dusk native. Obviously, I think that would be great. But yeah, I think it makes total sense that people have gone for ETH so far. We're just offering what we think is the next few iterations for certain sectors. Yeah.
Do you see anything coming from Ethereum being a potential? I mean, I say the word competitor because obviously right now it's where the majority of the market is, but things like we just described, the privacy elements. Do you see any developments coming down the chain? Like if there's a privacy integrate implementation with Ethereum that could potentially overcome that?
Yeah, no, not really, because when we see what they've got planned for Snarks, and well, first of all, there's the timelines, right? They're so big and they're so well adopted, but that also makes the stakes extremely high, right? And so everything that they do, takes ages basically, which is a blessing and a curse, right? To be that size. So from a speed point of view, I'm already not worried. And when we look at some of the things that Ethereum specifically are doing with Snarks or Stellar or other chains, you name it, then we're quite confident that the stuff that we've already built is faster and way more advanced. We're not just doing bulletproofs for some range proofs or some this or some that. We're replacing ring signatures, we're replacing this and that, we're adding zero knowledge into the consensus. We're not just doing it to hide a few numbers here and there, right? But it's really an integral part. It's not, when you really build it with privacy in mind, it's not something that you will simply bolt on later. Their whole consensus is set up for it, right? They would have to rework it from the ground to become something that arguably they don't need to be. So whilst I see a lot of these change moving towards increased privacy and enhanced privacy, which is good, I greatly suspect that for many of them it will be a feature rather than a core competence.
What about the progress of Dusk? Could you outline where you guys are at the moment?
Mm-hmm. So we concluded our raise in November last year, and then we were basically installed for roughly the first half of this year because we wanted to really put our heads down and get the work done. Now we've started listing the Dusk, the token on a few exchanges since the last few weeks, in parallel with our testnet release. So we're currently, the last bits and bobs are being finished, the testnet's running, and it's all being open source now. So all the code is going out there for people to see. The zero knowledge libraries, the consensus. We have a new white paper coming out, developer toolkits, monitoring tools, faucets like the ring could be one on Ethereum where you can get some testnet currency to play around with, and so it's all in the works and should be out this week, really, because it's been going quite steadily behind the screens for a while, but we wanted to align it with a few other things. So that's where we're at now. So we have a few more things in the marketing pipeline coming up to finish. Testnet is obviously a big product release for us. And then you also see us slowly moving towards some of the more STO-specific announcements in the next few months after we really set the scene with what the tech is and general awareness. we'll move more into what you can do with it, and what kind of parties are already doing stuff with it, um, and then edging closer towards that mainnet when these propositions will deploy.
Mhm. From what you were describing, it's a lot of work at the moment and not a lot of sleep from the sounds of it.
Yeah, no, it's been hard work. We tend to get our sleep in, but not much else. But yeah, it's for a good cause, man. It's extremely exciting times, and we're getting a lot of increased traction and interest. And protocols are weird. Like everybody wants a new protocol, but people don't really want to pay for it, right? So it was quite hard work when we did our when we did our funding round last year, because it's open source, right? It belongs to everyone. Why should I be the one paying for it? So you really need to come up with a good story. But now that we're getting there, your traction or your kind of appeal is so much wider, because everyone, it really speaks to your imagination much more than a very specific dApp, right, or something like that. Like now you're really trying to open a new realm of possibilities, which is just conceptually so much easier to pick up on, which is just very fun, very exciting.
And it's really cool since we last spoke to see the crazy level of developments that have been happening over there. So you say you've launched your testnet, and I mean, you've got like the exchange listings going on, but that's more like, I guess, appeasing some people and getting liquidity into the market. When it comes, I'm interested to know, when it comes to the mainnet, do you guys have an idea of when that could be possible? And also, is it possible to begin like launching STOs on the testnet, or are those developments only going to come when the mainnet is live?
Always three questions in one, Tom. Wow. So the mainnet we're gunning for this year still. When I look at the roadmap and also how it's expanded, I definitely feel very comfortable that we're on track, especially when I look at all the stuff that we've been adding in. But we're also quite bleeding edge on a lot of things, right? So it's tricky. So I know that if we stick to our current roadmap, then by the end of the year, everything will be good. I also know that by nature, right, you'll see stuff coming up that's like, right, this is also relevant, or this might also be important. So it's a constant kind of tug of war between getting the MVP out right, or thinking, whoa, but if should we consider this as a kind of holistic addition? Is that worth, uh, taking an extra week for, because we think the bigger picture will benefit from it? Or sometimes things just happen, right? Like a few months ago, ring signatures suddenly were broken, and then you have to work around that and come up with your own alternative to that. So it's an interesting space technologically. It's not necessarily the easiest path to try to front run a certain niche. But yeah, mainnet this year should be fine. And then with the propositions we're deploying, we're definitely going to be testing them on the testnet, right? So we'll be creating these propositions and we'll simulate an entire life cycle, basically, right? So what do we expect a security to do in terms of trading or corporate actions, or you name it, in a period of 50 years, for example? And let's just go through that entire life cycle in a week and see how it holds up, right? Like we have a pretty good idea, but let's prove it in the wild. And then when that's all really, really solid, and you're seeing absolutely nothing happen for a good sustained amount of time, then one of the things that we can consider is at least deploying them from a platform point of view. So you could fundraise for these propositions, or you could have them started with a testnet token or this or that, and do some kind of final deployment upon mainnet. So we are looking at hybrid possibilities. The most straightforward one is to just do the STO and lock it for a few months, because you're never quite sure what will happen to a testnet token, right? But you could also do both and just be very explicit and say, this token is nothing, the real stuff is locked, but come play around. But we're looking into the best alternatives.
And it's cool to see that you guys have some traction kind of moving forwards already, even though you're in the testnet phase. So I've seen that you guys have some quite cool announcements with Bitfinex and Ethernex. you're going to be,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, you're going to be launching some STOs on their platform because they've got a security token exchange coming up soon. Is that correct? Do you want to elaborate on the details?
It's very much in a no comment
Ah,
state.
okay. I've seen a few announcements, so I thought it might be public.
Yeah, no, so we're working on the protocol, and we think that the secondary market is a very interesting space to be in. We're working on our own announcements for the coming months.
Very tight-lipped. Okay. Yeah, I understand how you have to be. Uh, so you kind of described what's coming next. I think there's one question that pops in my mind when it comes to I guess, the similarities with Ether and Ethereum. And there's always the question for me about the value capture of the Ether token.
Yeah.
How do you view, I mean, it's a similar use case for your token, I believe. It's the fuel of the network. How do you view the token value capture for the Dusk Network token on Dusk Network?
It has some similarities, but also some differences, and it's mainly in the differences that are kind of innate to the security token use case versus, for example, utility tokens. What we saw a lot with Ethereum is when an ICO is held, right, and they raise funds, then that could have a potentially positive impact on the Ether price, right? And after that, a team ends up selling, or you name it. And there's philosophy definitely, and it leads to speculation, but it's kind of a net zero game, if you will. Now, with security tokens, you have a corporate life cycle that has a little bit more of recurring use cases, if you will, right? So a company might need to do some quarterly dividends, or to call a vote, or to check the shareholder registry, or to have some kind of interaction, right, with their smart contract. Meaning that there'll be more reasons to keep using the currency. It's not just one fundraising big bang, but we're looking at recurring usage. So whilst it's conceptually similar, the kind of touch points that you have are very, very different because of the different nature of the propositions that will be building on top of you. And then there's various other kind of use cases that you will see at scale. That we obviously need to prove. Things like payments, or you name it, right? This could be a fortunate side effect of sufficient network size.
And I guess over time, it's probably a case of adding more and more use cases to it. When companies collect,
we're a privacy protocol in its nature, right? And the smart contracting layer is very much focused on security tokens. But our killer app might become someone creating a cool zero knowledge browser plugin that runs on Dusk, and that allows you to log into your social media accounts using a zero knowledge proof, right? Meaning that you don't need to store your username and password information anymore with the Facebooks of the world. That might end up being the killer app, right? That hundreds of millions of people use, some kind of zero knowledge password tool, or you name it. It's always tricky to say. So we have a pretty good idea of where we want to take it, but it might be taken somewhere for you.
that's one of the beauties of open source systems. Like if you went back 5 years, no one would have ever predicted that something like Maker would be locking up over 1% of the total Ether supply, creating a decentralized stablecoin. And look where we are today. When it comes to a company that wants to raise money using your protocol, how will they be able to raise funds? So will it be just in your token, or will they be able to use Ether, Bitcoin, fiat currencies, etc.?
Yeah, so for the initial raises, we're definitely allowing fiat currencies, so that there needs to be some kind of hybrid. But we're also quite big on interoperability. You can already see it in some of the steps that we've taken with our own currency, and we want it to make sense for the propositions, right? Our adoption ambitions should not, at least on the short term, impact the success of STOs or a project like this. But there will be certain features that raising in Dusk, for example, will allow them to build into their raise. Certain whitelisting, certain restrictions, certain KYC elements, and it should be the superior functionality, if you will, that ultimately convince his propositions to do at least a partial raise in Dusk and potentially the rest in fiat, because that's the kind of crowds they appeal to. And when we are of sufficient size, it might switch over completely, but you need to start pragmatically.
That's really interesting. So building in extra features for companies who might choose to raise in the Dusk network coins. So have you got any thoughts on specifics for that? Have you got any thoughts on specifics for that?
Yeah. So we're working on a few things there. So one of the things is that we have a certain whitelisting feature, right, which enforces the trading restrictions set by the company, and then that means they can kind of automatically govern their secondary market. But you can do a version of this also on the fundraising side. So what you could say, for example, is we are building a whitelist of all the top 20 exchanges wallets, for example. And those are the wallets that will allow funds to come from, which means that you've already done, even before starting your fundraise, you've already got an additional layer of KYC because you're only accepting currencies that come from centralized platforms, right? Or you can say, I only want addresses with that automatically pass certain AML analysis, for example. And you can generate various kind of whitelists or subsets according to certain parameters and enforce those, which will really help you from a regulatory and compliance point of view. If you're, obviously you should do your own checks at the gate as well. But if you can build in all these extras, and that's really what KYC is about, right? To lower to the lowest possible doubt that this person is good to go, right? The goal is that 100%, and however good you are in getting there, and that's ultimately your story, right? Because someone might after KYC become a bad actor, or you name it, and it's still quite a human process. But the more you can do, the better, right? It will really help in maturing these propositions and integrating with existing financial infrastructure. So then, if when Dusk grows to be of sufficient size, and you have one alternative with additional functionality, that should be what gets people over the line, right? And not because we mandate it.
Okay, I think after about 25 minutes, we've got a nice holistic view of what Dusk is all about and what you guys are pursuing in the future. Is there anything that we've left out that you want to cover?
Good question. We have, well, like I said, we have the testnet coming up. Yeah, just keep a look at the socials. There's all kinds of good stuff coming up. We have a few of our developers in Barcelona at the end of the month doing a few presentations at a Zero Knowledge meetup. So if you're from around there, go say hi. And the rest, there's such a big pipeline of stuff coming up. There's really no point recapping. If people are keen, then the website's dusk.network, and they can find all the other socials there.
Yeah, well, if someone's watching this and they really want to take their learning to the next level, what's the one resource you'd recommend? Would it be the blog?
Yeah, Medium probably. Medium is very, very good from a conceptual point of view, right? That's where we really expand on some of the concepts that we use or what we're building. And if you really want to get your hands dirty, then join the Discord. That's really developer oriented. We don't over advertise it. We want to keep it techy, right? No nonsense in there. But if you're really keen to join us in the trenches, then that's the place to go. And otherwise, it's the Medium. Yeah.
All right, man. Well, it's good to chat to you again. I'm sure I'll have you on again soon.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Look forward to the next one.